Well, Paul, welcome to Retro Podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, and I'm very excited to chat with you today.
And how was your Christmas?
My Christmas was fantastic. Yes, a lot of family, a lot of fun, a little bit of time off. It was good. So.
Now, when it comes to New Year's, whether if it's New Year's Eve or New Year's Day, do you usually go out for New Year's or do you mostly stay home?
Well, for years, I was part of a pretty large production company, and we did a New Year's Eve party every single year, and it was usually very involved. So, did that for about 20 some years. So now New Year's Eve is very quiet in my house. Play a little cards, have a little dinner, but that's about it. And I think it's because I lost so many of those New Year's Eves working over the years. So.
Well, the pandemic definitely changed a lot of things.
Oh yeah, no question with that. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a couple years ago, the year after the pandemic, we did go out. We went to an event, but since then it's just pretty much sometimes my kids and their significant others show up, and sometimes my kids, their significant others and friends show up. So, but this year it was pretty quiet. We sent the invite out to some people and it was just us. So it's all good. Yeah.
Nice. And because you work for a radio station in Marion, Marion
Correct.
does a popcorn ball drop. Do they still do that or?
They do. They do. It's actually done by an internet radio station now. Yeah, we've never been part of it. We've been invited years ago. It was done as a community event, and now it's done as a radio promotion. So, but yeah, they do pretty well. I mean, looks like they get a couple hundred people out there, so that's kind of cool.
And how old were you when you had your first radio gig?
That's a great question. I just to kind of give a little background on my world. I grew up in Columbus, and I was fortunate enough that a lot of people knew that I wanted to get into broadcasting. I was kind of a fan at that day, and when I was 14 years old, I actually kind of built a radio station in my basement. And my father found out we were actually on the air in the neighborhood and put a stop to that. But so I guess I used to hobby radio and do that kind of stuff, go to Hamfest, things along those lines. And that got me kind of excited. Well, with that being said, when I was a junior in high school, the guidance counselor at our school came to me and said, "Hey, WOSU radio and TV is going to start to do some stuff, and they would like somebody who's interested in audio, radio, video kind of a thing." What they do is they do a thing. Matter of fact, I think they still do it. It's called In the Know, and it's a television quiz game that they do on WOSU between school in the know teams, their quiz teams, and they get together, they do it, and they would put it on the air. And they wanted the entire production to be done by high school students.
Nice.
The person who was programming then, it had been on for 15 years before, and I believe it's still on now, actually. But at the time, the guy who was in charge of the production wanted it all to be done with students. So I ended up getting invited into this organization, and I got to run the soundboard for In the Know for an entire season, which was really kind of cool. So with that being said, I was able to really learn that behind the scenes stuff, which I really enjoyed doing. And then that kind of springboarded me because I was part of the basketball program at the school that I went to in Columbus, St. Francis de Sales. And we had two guys that worked on our basketball scouting crew, and they did radio in Washington Courthouse, Ohio. And both of them said, "You got to come work for us." Well, I was already planning to go to school for broadcasting when I got out of high school. And so I started working at that station on Saturday nights, a little 4 hour shift from 6 to 10. They used to sign off at 10:15 on Saturday nights. And I would do that last shift, that 6 to 10 shift. And then I did eventually go to a radio trade school and ended up working mornings at that station for a couple of years. So that's kind of where my whole world got started. And that was way back when I in 1985. So my first full-time radio gig was in 1987.
Nice.
And then I've just kind of gone from there. I've been in radio the whole time. I mean, I used to work at a broadcasting school for a while and whatever, but since 1987, the only thing I've known is the world of radio.
And speaking of the 80s, I hear different stories about the 80s and Marion from different people like John Garnes, Johnny Steiner, a
Sure.
few friends like back when I used to go to Epworth, I would hear people that I went to airport with, they would tell stories
Absolutely.
about what it was like growing up in the 80s in Marion. What was your memory growing up in the 80s in Marion?
Well, I didn't get to Marion until 1990. So I was in Columbus that time, and then I went to Washington Courthouse, which was down in Fayette County, and I lived there from 1987 to 1989. And then I moved up here in September of 90. But my wife and I have been together since 87, and she's always lived here. Now, at one time she worked in radio in Newark, and then she worked in radio up in Bucyrus, and then became a teacher, and she's retired from that. But so I was up here a lot in the late 80s. And I'll tell you, if the one thing that I really remember about coming up here in the 80s and getting into the 90s was the Popcorn Festival, which I ended up being on the board for a very long time. Matter of fact, I just ended my last stint on the Popcorn Festival Board of Trustees just this past year. I'm still going to do some stuff with the festival, but we had heard about it. I mean, I'm growing up in Columbus as an 18-year-old, 17-year-old, 19-year-old, and everybody's talking about these amazing bands that are playing in Marion, Ohio for absolutely no money at all. You just go, it was a free show. So we actually used to come to Marion for the Popcorn Festival and got a chance to see some of the acts and really enjoyed that. And of course, my wife and I had been together. We were friends, and then we started dating, and we would come up, we would meet up with them. So really my first impressions of Marion were they have a lot of fun up there. And I've got a friend that used to do a huge concert at the Marion Fairgrounds in the late 80s, even into the early 90s. I think the last year he did it was 91. And he brought in retro bands, and they did it at the fairgrounds in August. And it never really did very well. He did it for a couple of years. It was called the Heart of Ohio Jam, I believe. And so we helped with that a little bit. And then, of course, when I moved up here and started working at WDIF in the fall, well, I guess it'd been late summer of 1990. We were part of those, which made for quite a bit of fun. But really, that was it. I mean, that was about the only thing I knew about Marion, was the fact that the world's largest popcorn festival was here. So,
And February is coming up.
yeah.
It's coming up in a month, and will be the Groundhog Day event. Will you still be running Groundhog Day, or?
Well, I will not. I have since switched duties. I still do my morning show on Magic 95.9, which I love doing. And I do a lot of stuff for the other stations. But I work virtually now, and I am not the actual operator of the station in Marion. I help stations all across the country with programming and production issues, which is a lot of fun. That's my primary job. But yeah, I'll be definitely talking about it and doing what have you. But I believe Eric Mosley is going to be the host this year. But I did it for a long time. Yeah.
Nice. Definitely gonna try and go up to see.
It's fun.
Oh yeah.
It's a good time.
I haven't been in 5 years. I was gonna go in 2020, but then my mother got sick, so we weren't able to. She didn't have COVID, don't worry. It was just
good.
It was just a regular sick. But and of course it always fell on a weekday, and I was in college, and I was always on campus, and Nicholas was at school, and it was difficult trying to find the time, but definitely gonna try and find time to go to it this year after.
Yeah, it's a Friday this year, so that ought to be fun. Yeah, that's the main reason why I'm scheduled to work that day for my regular job with iHeartMedia. So yeah, I do my show, and then I do that, and that's one of my regular days. So they've got Eric doing the show. He'll do a great job with it. But I'm seeing that things are coming together really well. They're expecting a really good crowd, and I think it's going to be a heck of a lot of fun, as it has been. Like I said, I was part of it. Oh my goodness, indirectly since 1997. So it's a lot of fun, and I'm still obviously part of it, but I won't be hosting this year. So yeah, it'll be fun. Yeah.
Now, the groundhog they have for every event, is it the same groundhog, or is it a different groundhog?
No, we have to search around the state to find one. There are some requirements to have a groundhog to put on display for that type of a deal. It's like anything. When you so basically, anybody who brings an animal, for instance, if COSI comes into a school or they go to an event, they have to have certain permits, licenses, things like that. And it's not always easy to find an organization that has a groundhog and has those permits, because what normally happens is A groundhog isn't something that's normally kept in captivity. You don't go to a zoo and see too many groundhogs, right? So what you have to do with that is you've got to find someone that ended up with one that's going to put it back in the wild, probably into the spring. If a groundhog wakes up early, and the way our weather's been, probably a lot of them, and they are unprotected, some of these organizations will take them in and protect them. They'll hold on to them for a couple of months to make sure that they're going to be okay. And then when it comes into spring, when everybody's out doing their thing, then they'll let them back out in the wild. So you have to kind of find an organization that, number one, has the correct licensure and permits to be able to bring it out to display. And then number two, you gotta have one that literally, wow, we've got one here. We picked one up a couple of weeks ago and we're able to bring it out. So the good news is I understand we've got a great groundhog, and I understand that it could be very easily could be a descendant of Buckeye Chuck, which is fun. So yeah, groundhogs only live a few years. So we do have the original groundhog, the original ground chuck, if you will, and he actually was stuffed. A taxidermist did his thing, so we'll have him out on display. But yeah, from what I understand, we have a groundhog secured from inside the state of Ohio. That's the other thing. We want to make sure that whoever gets to be Buckeye Chuck that year is actually a native Ohio groundhog. And that can be complicated as well. As many groundhogs as there are out there. But yeah, as of Friday, I was told that we have one coming down from Northeast Ohio. So I'm kind of excited about that. So yeah, you never know. I mean, it's one of those things. But yeah, it makes for a lot of fun. The kids like to meet them. They're not allowed to get up close to them because obviously they are wild animals. So they're in a cage and whatnot. But yeah, Buckeye Chuck is always some Ohio groundhog that's going to be in Marion, Ohio that day.
Yeah, and of course, not getting up close to the groundhog, you never know what kind of disease it could have. It could be fun.
Well, sure, yeah, I get it. All that, and the groundhogs too. We're gonna put them out on display or whatever. They're gonna get a little nervous, like any pet or animal would. For a number of years we had a Buckeye Chuck who we knew was a descendant because it was a Marion County groundhog, and it lived a long life because it was being kept in a safe in a home. It was actually almost a pet, for the lack of a better term, and we were cool with that one. That one worked out really, really well, but then for years before, we were getting them from an outlet over in Crawford County, an animal rescue. But they had since, the folks that ran that had since retired. So it's just kind of a challenge to find one every year. It takes a little bit of extra work. And sometimes you get help from ODNR and sometimes you don't. It just depends on whether or not they know if there's any around that you can work with. So,
yeah. In some countries, they use a badger as their Groundhog Day.
Right. Yeah. That basically you can use any hibernating rodent, for a lack of a better term. That's where when you look back at the history of Groundhog Day and what it is, it basically is an indigenous rodent in that area. Obviously, we have tons of groundhogs here, so it is definitely Groundhog Day in Marion. So we're looking forward to it. It'll be fun.
Well, looking forward to it as well. Yeah. And what was your inspiration getting into broadcasting?
Well, I'll tell you, I just was, when I was a kid, I was a big fan of the Cincinnati Reds. I am a baseball fan. If I turn my camera, you'll see that the entire display that I'm looking at is almost all baseball. Let's see, it's pretty much all baseball today. Yeah, I change it around every once in a while, but here's a prime example. I've got a replica of Progressive Field sitting on my deal. I've got all my baseball caps here in the corner. So baseball is my absolute favorite sport. So when I was a kid, I would listen to the Cincinnati Reds baseball games on the radio. And at the time, Al Michaels did play-by-play for a few years. And I got the bug. I wanted to be that play-by-play guy. And then, of course, Marty Brenneman took over, and we had, Marty and Joe Nuxall was doing games for years and years and years. And I grew up listening to them. And I believe, and I still do it today, that the best way to get baseball action is through the radio. I sit out on my deck in the summertime and listen to a baseball game practically every night. So that's where I came from. I wanted to get into radio because I thought that was the coolest thing in the world, that these guys got to sit and watch 162 baseball games and call it on the radio and call it a career and do pretty well with it. And I was always a rock and roll fan. Of course, I I love all music. I am a huge fan. Matter of fact, that's you talked about Christmas earlier. All I bought for Christmas gifts this year for people was trips to concerts, and mostly 80s rock and roll concerts throughout the year that we're going to go see, which is what I thoroughly enjoy doing. So I just, matter of fact, just the other day, I met up with a friend and invited them to go with us on a show here in a couple of months as a Christmas gift. And but that's kind of what I'm into. But I love all genres of music. But with that, and growing up being a rock and roll fan, and I grew up with Pat and Wags on QFM 96, and so I'm a big 80s rock fan. And yeah, I mean, that's the world that I live in. I'm a huge yacht rock fan, which goes back into the 70s. If I ever just need to sit outside and listen to some music, a lot of times it's either yacht rock or it's a retro 80s a channel, a rev station, which I'm really into. So yeah, but I love current country music. I love older country music. I've worked at a lot of country stations. So music was a huge driver for me to get into radio, because I could get paid to do music every day and do sports, and fortunate enough to still be doing that all today. So it's kind of cool.
Speaking of rock and roll bands, my parents, they did a raffle. Well, they you know what I mean. They wrote on the ticket and they put it in the raffle bin.
Sure.
And unexpectedly didn't see this coming, but they won. And it was a guitar signed by the members from both Styx and Foghat.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. They have it on display in their living room.
That is so cool. Yeah, we're seeing Styx again this year. We're going down to Riverbend to see Styx and Foreigners. It's going to be Foreigner's last tour. I've seen Foreigner in one way, shape, or form about 8 times. I've seen Styx about 20 times. And then John Waite, who used to be the lead singer of the Babies, he's going to be opening for them. So no, looking forward to that show. That's in August. So we're going to be down at Riverbend for that one. In late August. And yeah, my wife's probably the biggest Styx fan I know, besides maybe your mom. And,
definitely.
Yeah, we see Styx about every other year now. We used to see him about every year, but about every other year. And we kind of switch off. I'm a big REO Speedwagon fan. So some years they tour together and we can see them both at the same time. But yeah, Styx, REO, Foreigner, Journey. We're going to see Journey and Def Leppard this year. Looking forward to that. Going to see Heart this year. Going to see Toto this year. All on the schedule so far to see. My wife's a big fan of Night Ranger. We got a chance to see them last year. Might get to see them here in the spring over in Newark. So I mean, we just kind of find the bands that we really like. Huge fans of Chicago. Earth, Wind, and Fire is one of my absolute favorite bands. Love them. Anytime you put horns in a rock and roll band, you had me at hello. The 1975, I'm a big fan. I mean, if you're into alt music, and you talk about all the retro stuff, check out the band 1975. I love them. Matter of fact, getting ready to take a trip up to see my son here a little later, and I'm probably going to stream them on my drive. They're fantastic. Horns in the band, you got me. I'm in. Yeah.
And for people that want to go into radio broadcasting, especially like myself, who really wants to go into talk show broadcasting,
sure,
what is the best advice that you would like to pass on?
Well, the first thing that I tell everybody these days is do what you're doing right now. Get yourself a podcast. Because the only way you're going to get good at doing interviews, the only way you're going to get good at covering things and asking tough questions and knowing what those tough questions are and being prepared for the responses that you'll get back when you ask a tough question is to do it. I went to radio school. I was doing radio before I went to radio school. I was blessed in that opportunity because some people along the way helped me out. I mean, you network, you find that type of thing. So my number one thing for anyone who wants to get into any type of broadcasting, get a podcast. It's easy. It's pretty much free. I mean, you got to have a couple of tools, but it's not expensive. I mean, I have a radio studio in my home that is complete with, I've got podcasting. I've got, some of the highest level mics you can have, that kind of stuff. I mean, I have this whole package and it's less than $2,000. So, you know, when I started radio 40 years ago, if you'd have told me I could have had a studio that was as good as any radio studio in the country for a couple of $1,000, I'd have told you were crazy, because that's what I paid to go to radio school when my parents helped me out. It was like $2,500 to go to radio school, and I can now build a studio in my house for $2,000. Right on. And you can do it cheaper than that too. But I mean, as far as, you know, being able to be on any radio station in the country and sound like you're in, you know, multi, you know, tens of $1,000 studio, to do it for a couple of grand is incredible to me. But anyway, so get yourself a podcast. It's easy. It's pretty much free. You know, come up with what you want to get into. I mean, obviously you're into retro, and I think that's cool. You know, I do a podcast that's all about college football, and we do a full season. And I got an expert to help me with that, a guy who used to coach Division I college football at Kent State and Western Kentucky, that just is such a football junkie, and he knows, and he's got coaches that he's worked with and coached and been friends with all over the country. And that was his way to stay in college football with not being in college football, because it's a tough business. You know, so we have that podcast going, and I do a couple podcasts with some other people. I host one for the Dog Professor. This guy's been a dog trainer for 45 years, and he does these great shows, and I help host that show with him. And so anyway, so I get a chance to do those. So my suggestion to you is find something that you're passionate about and do a podcast on it. And when you start that podcast, make sure you follow that podcast through. I've got a lot of folks that I've helped get into the world of podcasting and given them some leads, some ideas. I actually have a full presentation that I did at the Marion Public Library a while back, and I've sent that to people and said, hey, follow these and you can get yourself into podcasting. And then once you start, you don't need me anymore. You just continue to do things. But number one, get yourself a podcast. Number two, find the shows that you like, and whether it be a radio show, a podcast show, a TV show, something on, you know, Netflix or YouTube or whatever. Find that show that you like and that host that you like. You think they're really, really good at what they do, and emulate what they do. Not one-on-one, but take that piece out. And then once you take that few pieces, or few nuggets, as I like to call them, the guys all laugh when I say, grab a nugget from this show or that show, then find another show that you like and take a nugget or two out of that show, and then find another show that you like and take a nugget or two out of that. My entire career was based on, man, that's kind of cool. I can do this and I can make that my own. Do it. You know, they say that radio, TV, you know, there's more thieves in radio and TV than any other industry. I think every industry is that way. You find somebody that's doing something that you want to do, and you begin to emulate what they did to get to that point. And that's a good piece of advice for anyone that wants to do anything. Emulate what they do. Not 100%. Find the things that you like and do that. And then find somebody else that's doing something that you want to do, that's really good at it and being successful at it. And they do a couple of things that you like, and then grab those things and then begin to build that. My entire show is built on other very successful guys' shows. That's how I do it. And then you gravitate, you find what you like, and then always listen to what you already did, but never the next day or never later on that day. So yeah. So if you do a show and you're doing this show today on Monday, if you really want to dig into that show, you know, put it out, do your thing, say, great, tomorrow I'm doing another show. Next day I'm doing another show. 2 weeks, 3 weeks down the road, go back and look at that Monday show, listen to that Monday show, watch that Monday show, listen in there and scrutinize what you did. And the reason why you want to do it a week or two down the road is because you know everything that happened during that interview, during that show or whatever, and you make excuses for yourself. 2-3 weeks down the road, you forgot that you bumped your water bottle and it fell on the floor, or 2 weeks later, you forgot that maybe there was a connection issue and your mind wasn't 100% into the beginning of that interview because you had to get that connection issue out of your mind. So you forget that in 2-3 weeks. So then all of a sudden you're like, I can't do this anymore. This is wrong. I shouldn't be, you know, using this type of, you know, these words or the way I'm laying out this interview or whatever, because you forget all the excuses it could have. And you actually are going down to the core of, that's not what we're going to do to make this show good. And then you fix that. And the next time you go and do it, you know, everybody in the world of sports, and I'm a huge sports guy. What do? They watch film. The most successful guys in sports watch film. Yeah, they have to have their body right, their nutrition right. They have to have their sleep, all of that. That's all part of it. But one of the biggest things they'll tell you, guys that were not successful at the next level in a sport, it's because they didn't take time to scrutinize their play and prepare for the play of others. And it's so important. They're like, watch film who? Watch film you, watch film them, watch film whoever. But you've got to get better at your craft. And one of the ways to do that is to engage in those types of things. So I always suggest to people, make sure you air check yourself. Do it again, do it again. If it doesn't feel comfortable to you, it's probably not supposed to be in your show. If it feels comfortable, that's great. Because once again, if it doesn't feel comfortable, it doesn't go back to who you are at your core, right? It may be great for Howard Stern to do something on his show, but you like, hey, that's kind of cool. He's really successful. I'm going to do that. You try that on your show and it doesn't feel comfortable. You might want to try it again because it could have just been a bad day. But if it doesn't feel comfortable doing it, then get rid of it because it's not you. It's not who you are. So, yeah. So I tell everybody, get yourself a podcast. All right. Make sure that you're getting yourself out there. Practice. Make sure you keep doing it. Look at the guys that are doing it right or the guys that you think are doing it right and emulate some of the things that they're doing and keep doing it. Don't stop. Because what happens, a lot of people struggle somewhere in there. They're like, well, I don't have 11 million followers yet. No, you're not. Eventually you'll get there. You just keep doing it. You keep doing it and you keep doing the work. Make sure that you utilize social media as much as you can, right? So yeah, to get into the world of broadcasting, I suggest the first thing to do is make sure you're getting that practice and you're getting going. Because now every time I talk to guys that are hiring, and there's not that many guys that are hiring, the first thing they say they ask people is, do you have a show already that I can listen to? 40 years ago when I got in this business, we didn't have the ability to have a show. I was fortunate enough that I ended up at a broadcasting school, so I was able to get an audition tape and get going. But I wasn't doing that every single day because I wasn't on the air every single day. We might only get 3 shows a week or whatever. Hard to get good at something if you don't practice it as much as you possibly can. So make sure that you're practicing, you get that good tape, and then you start running through the trades, man. You see what's going on. I mean, we have a deal right there that says, the iHeartCareers.com, and you go there and you start looking and you see a job for entry-level board op, and then you apply for it. And you're like, okay, maybe we'll go in as a board op, and then we'll start nagging the living daylights out of management to get myself on the air. Hey, I do this podcast. I do this, I do that. And hopefully it works out. I mean, the last successful people that I've worked with that have started, basically in your type of situation, it's what they did. They networked. They met people in the industry and they already had a show and they were already working at a station, and then they were able to move to another and kind of go from there. But it's a tough nut, and it may not be a full-time gig, but you can certainly have a heck of a lot of fun doing it part-time too. So,
Oh, yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, Paul, thank you very much for joining today's episode. And
You're welcome.
One last question, and we're actually coming to the end of the episode. This is a question from my mother.
Yeah.
What was your favorite board game?
My favorite board game. Wow. See, that's a good question. Now, recently we've been playing more board games because my son's fiance is really into games. So we've been playing things like Triple E and a lot of cards and stuff like that. But I'm a huge fan of euchre. I'm not the best player at euchre. I've got some friends that I play with that are, and they're making me better, which is nice. But my absolute favorite board game, if I go all the way back into the world, we used to play Monopoly all the time. And I was pretty good at it back in the day. We haven't played much lately. But I used to play Monopoly and Risk. We would play Life, which was always a lot of fun. But I would have to say Monopoly's probably number 1 and Risk would be number 2. So love those board games. But I'm a big euchre player. I enjoy playing euchre when I can. So
nice. And thank you again for joining today's episode.
My pleasure.
And enjoy winter.
Absolutely. Yes. I'll be probably in my studio up here looking out like I am now to see snow on the rooftops of vehicles in the street. And I'm in my warm studio having a good time.
Well, have a good one.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate you.